The solution to a lot of the turmoil and disagreement and angst after a death and during the estate settlement process is just by being proactive and leaning into this process when minds are clear and time is plentiful.
Right, because it's not just the time, it's also the willingness, isn't it, to kind of jump into the conversation. And I'm not suggesting that anyone start a dinner conversation with, so, what do you want me to do after you die about your stuff and about your things? It's not very sexy, right? Not a great conversation. But I want everyone to be a little bit sensitive to someone's willingness to discuss it.
Did you plan for this, or did you miss when life demands answers you can't dismiss? Will you be ready when the trumpet blows? Do you have the blueprint for life's unknowns?
Welcome to Plan for This. I'm Marguerite Lorenz, your host today, and I am so delighted to have my guest, Greg Barnsdale. He's the author of Do Not Ignore Your Mortality, and we are going to talk about that and many other things today. Thank you so much, Greg, for being with us today.
Well, thank you for having me, Marguerite. I appreciate it.
I'm excited about your book. What made you decide to write Do Not Ignore Your Mortality?
Well, it was really frustration, actually. I started out as a young man attending college here in the Toronto, Ontario area, taking funeral service and graduating, and then I worked for large and small funeral homes. But what I saw and realized rather quickly, Marguerite, was that the majority of situations of families that I was helping and had witnessed, there was really no advanced planning done. And the fallout for the surviving family members was often very, very difficult for them compared to the far fewer situations where there was proactive conversations and planning that had taken place. And it was very clear which was better. And then after about 13 or 14 years, when I left the funeral industry, I'm still a licensed funeral director today. I'm no longer working in that field or the financial planning field that I pivoted to after 13 or 14 years. But I found the same sorts of things there because I explained to all of my financial planning clients about my background in the funeral industry and wanted to help them plan for end-of-life issues and be proactive. So I ended up focusing in the area of life insurance and long-term care and critical illness insurance and disability insurance and so on, as well as retirement investing. But I found the same sort of reluctance there too, that people to a large degree wanted to talk more about their investments than they did the things that could get in the way of a good retirement, like a premature death.
Why do you think people are so resistant to talking about estate planning?
Well, I think for a lot of people, Marguerite, as you well know, people's situations can be so dramatically different. And I think estate planning to a large degree paralyzes quite a number of people, and they easily become overwhelmed, so they don't do anything. And it simply just stalls the process. Plus, on top of that, there's the whole issue of it's an incredibly difficult conversation in many cases to have with people. I've talked with people, and I'm sure you have too, and suggested that they go home and talk to their families about these sorts of things. And I've had clients come back to me or message me back and say, we tried, but we were shut down. So and many people are superstitious. There just seems to be many hurdles for some people to really get through this.
I had a client conversation. So picture, if you will, a 95-year-old woman and her little girl, 65 years old, sitting next to her. And the 95-year-old said, I feel ready to talk about my funeral arrangements. And little girl reaches over, puts her hand on mom's arm, which is really a quelling kind of motion, right? It's a silencing gesture, and says, oh, mom, you're not going to die. And I said, well, not right now, maybe not this week, but mom is going to die at some point. And mom nods, and daughter does not know what to do, what to say, because optimism seemed to have been crushed in that moment. And eventually I asked daughter to step out, in the right time during the meeting so I could have a one-on-one conversation with my client who was ready to have that conversation. So how can we help adult children be more accepting and be more ready to have that conversation?
This is the core message, Marguerite, that I'm stressing to people in all of the interviews and such that I give, and I think it is the most inspiring way that I can think of to inspire people to lean into this planning when minds are clear and time is plentiful. But I'm stressing the fact that end-of-life planning helps reduce the stress of aging. It tends to leave survivors more financially and emotionally resilient. It tends to leave them in a place where they are more likely to get along with each other and less likely to contest those final wishes. It naturally results in more meaningful legacies because of the planning. It tends to benefit charities because of the immense tax planning benefits of planned giving. It takes immense pressure off the courts from otherwise having to deal with those unorganized, messy estates. And all these things cumulatively help bolster the economy. It's a massive win for everyone. But why don't more people do it?
Well, there's that emotional component, right? And here's what I realized about the daughter in that conversation is that she was struggling with her own loss. In that moment when mom was ready to talk about her funeral, which is about mom was ready to talk about the funeral, daughter's response was to say, I'm not ready to lose my mom. And it became about the daughter. And one of the hardest concepts we have in terms of the fiduciary work is that my job is really to work for that trustor, that creator of the estate plan, and put their needs before my own. And when children serve as trustees, it's a real challenge. It's a real challenge to actually put your parent first before yourself. So I'm saying this to anybody who's listening and anybody who's watching the show, that you might have big feelings about the loss of your parents, but that is not your parents' responsibility in having these conversations. Your responsibility in being receptive to your parents' planning is to let them talk out loud. Let it be about them. Let it be about their concerns and their worries before you worry about your own. What do you think about that, Greg?
I think that's an excellent way of putting it, Marguerite, because they are the focus. You are absolutely correct. And when someone is willing to have these types of open conversations, they need to be embraced.
Yeah, I know it's scary and I know it's uncomfortable. And everyone remembers the rule if they've ever been on an airplane, right? You have to put your own oxygen mask on, right, before you assist anyone else. And I think that that's a really valuable concept here because I recognize that I'm not necessarily an expert in your life. And I would like to talk about some of the experiences you've had recently. But I want to point out that since I'm not an expert in your life, I have to take care of myself first. I have my own estate plan done, and getting my estate plan done was work. And there were feelings, and I had my own feelings about my own children's milestones that I would miss, or some of the other possible losses. But now, because I have my own estate plan, I feel ready to have those conversations with other people. And I want to suggest that to all the adult children who think that they might be the ones mom and dad picked to be responsible. Get your own estate plan done before you worry about mom and dad's. It'll really prepare you much more effectively for the work to come.
Yes, yeah, that's an excellent point. And the statistics that we're seeing here in Canada, and I've seen from your country as well in the US, Marguerite, and other parts of the world too, survey after survey seems to consistently reveal that these types of proactive conversations are simply not taking place early enough. And that really seems to be the solution to a lot of the turmoil and disagreement and angst after a death and during the estate settlement process is just by being proactive and leaning into this process when minds are clear and time is plentiful.
Right, because it's not just the time, it's also the willingness, isn't it? to kind of jump into the conversation. And I'm not suggesting that anyone start a dinner conversation with, so, what do you want me to do after you die about your stuff and about your things? It's not very sexy, right? Not a great conversation. But I want everyone to be a little bit sensitive to someone's willingness to discuss it. And I think that's very helpful. You've had your own health things going on, and I just wonder, have you updated your plan? Is there anything about that you'd like to share from your personal experience for anybody that might be faced with having to do some planning now that they've discovered that there's an illness?
Yes, it was very ironic, Marguerite, after a career working as a funeral director and then shifting gears, as I said, and working as a financial advisor and then becoming a certified executive advisor and a hospice volunteer and just being around end-of-life roles much of my career, I finally published this book, Do Not Ignore Your Mortality. And then 2 months after I published the darn thing, I was diagnosed with a large brain tumor.
Wow. That's a big experience. How did that adjust your thinking?
Well, I thought I had experienced it all, but I guess a higher power had different plans for me. And it has widened my perspective towards all these things, but I can certainly attest for the fact that and as I was creating the manuscript in my book, creating this couple of paragraphs, I guess, or the few paragraphs around explaining how difficult it would be to rush to get one's final affairs in order when also dealing with a health concern, not realizing that I had this large tumor growing in my skull at the time, I can tell you without any hesitation that I was so relieved that I had my final affairs in order.
Yeah, let's talk about the relief. When I got my estate plan done the first time, my little boys were 8 and 9 years old. I was a single mom. I was just learning this work and following my mom to all of her meetings and shadowing her so I could learn more about how to do this fiduciary work. It's very complex, right? Tax, legal, financial, and even medical decisions for clients. And I had that realization as I was going to networking meetings and driving on the freeway and so on, that if I didn't come home, what would happen to my kids? So my motivation was really about them initially. It wasn't really even about myself. It was about the catastrophe it would be if the one parent that's paying for everything and organizing everything and being there couldn't come home. And I cried over my first draft. And I mentioned the milestones earlier. I might miss their weddings, or I might miss their first home, or I might miss their first business, or anything else that would happen in their lives that's so precious. It makes life beautiful. And as soon as I got everything signed, dated, and notarized, my heart was lighter. Driving on the freeway was a completely different experience. I actually felt for the first time like I'd really done everything I possibly could for my kids. And that relief is what I'm offering. That is really why I want people to get their estate plans done, because there's this sigh of just letting it go. Did you have a similar experience in getting your documents done?
I did. I did. And you're exactly right. It's a weight off of our shoulders knowing that we can't control many of these things in our lives. And humans crave control. We learn that from a young age, I think, when we first discovered the word no. and it's carried throughout our lives. And even as we see within the aspect of people wanting to control the very last few months, weeks, and hours of their life if they're suffering from a terrible illness, as an example. But I do really think that there's a wave. There's a wave of this, what many people are calling the death positive movement. And it's not that we're people like you and I are trying to put this spin on death being this great adventure, although J.K. Rowling says that it is the next great adventure. But being prepared takes this weight off of our shoulders regarding an issue that to a large degree we cannot control.
I think that that's really the scary part, isn't it? That I won't have the keys to the car. I'm not the one who's going to make sure the bills are paid. I might be very much alive, but incapacitated. And by the way, for anyone who's wondering, an estate plan goes into effect. You can choose for it to go into effect by resigning as trustee of your trust and letting your successor go to work. Obviously, death means you can't do anything more yourself, and somebody else has to do the work. And the other one is incapacity. It is possible that you'll be alive, but not able to make any new decisions. So if you couldn't make any new decisions, what are the 3 things, Greg, that you can think of that'd be very important to you that someone else would take care of for you?
I would want someone, Marguerite, who could step up and truly reflect my core values that I had previously expressed to them when I had my marbles, and I could think it through and share my true thoughts with them. Because if anyone is at the point, as you and I well know, where they are incapacitated and can no longer make these decisions, there are far too many situations and cases where families have no idea what the person really wanted to have happen. And I think that would be one of the top things that I would want my surrogate, my fiduciary, to be able to accurately reflect on my behalf and speak up for me, even if it was tough to do.
That's such a great point, to really think about who I can be fully honest with.
Yes.
You know, I have adult children, and I love them, and I believe that they love me. We have very open, rambling conversations. When we do, it's an hour, 2-hour long conversation. We talk about everything, but not everything. I mean, I don't really think I want either of my boys to be the first one to go through my bedroom drawers, for instance. You know, I'm not sure that I really want to have to discuss certain medical things or certain things going on with my body because, one, I don't want to worry them. I don't want to concern them. I'm already working with a doctor. I already have a husband. You know, I'm taking care of myself. So I'm just putting that out there for our audience to consider, that I recognize that your kids might seem like the most immediate and obvious choice to serve as your fiduciary. But as Greg pointed out, if you can't have those conversations about your values and what's really important to you and really feel heard and received, maybe they're not the right people to pick.
Yes. And that's what I think stalls a lot of people from this type of planning. I'm sure you've heard this many times, Marguerite, that people will put off having a will put together because they can't agree on who they want as guardians for their young children.
Yeah.
And it's important for people to realize that it's so vital to get moving with this process and establish what you want in place, at least for now. You can always revise these types of plans and update your will and your medical directives and so on as your life evolves and your opinions change.
Well, I agree. And I think you have to agree to disagree about wills. Let me give you an example. You could draw straws or flip a coin. One parent goes first and says, well, if something happens to us, then I want it to be my sister who's the guardian. Okay, but choice number 2, the backup to your sister, is my choice. And we get to go back and forth so that we have our people reflected in our documents. And it's okay to not agree, but then life happens, doesn't it? Because
Yes.
I think a lot of people misunderstand that an estate plan is not a one and done. It's a let's get started with what we know at this moment. Let's pick from the people that we have in our lives at this moment. But as time goes on, we should be updating that estate plan, shouldn't we?
Yes, absolutely.
Do you think there's a schedule or an event cycle or something that people can rely on to say, this is when I should update my estate plan?
Well, I've heard many times that the estate plan, the will specifically, should be reviewed every 5 years or so, or when a significant change happens in one's life. But it seems to me that more frequent reviews would be prudent. And more open, regular conversations with family members would be prudent as well, to make sure that everyone, those vital closest people who would be involved at the time of an incapacity or death, know exactly what is to be done and where to find everything.
Oh, where to find everything. That's its own puzzle to solve. You know, as part of the fiduciary process, what many people may not realize is that if it's me as the successor trustee, and by the way, please don't name me in your documents. I already love you and I care about you and I'm giving you all my information, but I'm not taking any new clients. But as you name someone, know that they're going to have to gather all of the physical paper in your living space and from your car and from wherever else you might have it, because they're searching for your assets and they want to be sure that they find everything. They also need to protect your identity from theft, right? So anything with a name and a number on it needs to be collected and secured. Maybe it needs to be shredded. Maybe it needs to be scanned and saved. But all of that paperwork, and if you do all of your transactions by email and everything on your computer, just know that your successor may or may not be able to get to those records. So at least having a list of your financial institutions, at least having a way for your successor to find things, or giving that person a tour of how to find your stuff would make their job so much better and easier. Any other advice you have about making that transition easier for the successor?
Yes. Letting the successor know where you keep your passwords and your login credentials for all the different virtual platforms and banking, etc., that you do. You know, that's one of the things that my wife and I have been quite diligent about. I do have to admit I'm more diligent. But having a record of that in an ongoing way to update it so that she would know if this brain tumor had killed me, Marguerite, that she would know exactly where to find everything and how to move forward.
Now, there's a little challenge with that, Greg, if I may.
Yes.
And that is that we must never pretend to be another person. And my concern from a fiduciary perspective is that I don't necessarily want someone's passwords, but I want a list of all the institutions with whom they do business. Why? So I would have an opportunity to present my credentials along with the documents that give me authority and actually alert that financial institution or alert that entity that I am not Greg. I am his chosen person. He granted me authority. He gave me the power. And so here's the documents that give me the power. And here's my ID, and here's my mother's maiden name and my blood type if you need it, in order for me to access those accounts. What do you think about that?
Yes, that is a great point, because trying to masquerade as someone that you're not does not make sense. Your approach makes far more sense, and I should have elaborated on that.
Well, your book is excellent. That is just one point that I wanted to add to your book, is that in terms of passwords and logins, it's really to have the list of financial institutions more than it is to pretend to be you.
Yes.
And even among spouses, I think there's an assumption that when you're married, that person has power of attorney for you, that person has a right to see everything you've got, and that institutions will just automatically grant that person access. And that is not the case, is it?
Yeah. Yes, that's very true.
Yeah. There's a quote that I found in your book that I thought was lovely, and I'm going to find it. You were talking about the definition of estate planning itself needs to change. And you had offered the term legacy planning. Are there other words or other things that you think people should think about in terms of their planning to maybe soften the blow?
Well, I certainly understand and respect the fact, Marguerite, that we're discussing a very delicate topic. And for many people, it is very challenging to discuss. I've heard other people suggest that estate planning should be rephrased or perhaps more commonly known as legacy planning, because it's more optimistic. It's more of a brighter outlook as opposed to our demise and our non-existence, our death. And that's why I've come up with this, what I think is the most inspiring way of motivating people to lean into this type of planning and using people, the professionals that are so willing to help them with this sort of planning. But it's challenging. And that's why I've also come up with a living legacy quiz on my website that anyone can access free of charge without any obligation. And anyone taking that very brief 5-question quiz will likely realize quickly that they have some homework to do.
Excellent. I did take a look at that, and Greg's website is donotignoreyourmortality.com. And we'll have that accessible in the show notes, of course, and be able to find Greg. I also wanted to highlight, since we have a couple of more minutes, you note, considering the prevalence of second, third marriages, more complex end-of-life regulations, aging demographics. I mean, I think blended families have their own particular challenges. What's your advice to anyone who might be marrying for the second or third time?
Well, I'm married for the second time, and I can certainly attest for that. That's very true. And we've all heard stories of second marriages and the difficulty in merging those families and the immense challenges that can take place, especially after a death, compounded by the fact that the jurisdictional rules and how they play into aspects of marriage and common law relationships and business ownership and all those various things make it very, very complex.
Well, I think that we have an opportunity, if you've already been married and it didn't work out, to make whatever next marriage adventure you have better than before. And as my stepmom would say, we must plan our exit as we enter. Some people think of prenuptial or postnuptial agreements as far as that's concerned. My husband, my second husband, and I made the decision, because we have 6 boys between the two of us, that we wanted to have a yours, mine, and ours kind of approach. And we actually took care of the things I was most concerned about in our estate planning process. So this is not to give anyone legal advice, but I would love for you to consider, world, that you need an estate plan in place, especially if you get married a second time, because you need to be honest, right? Isn't marriage the business of romance? And don't we want it to all work better than it did before? And we should be able to talk with our new best friend about these kinds of topics. Greg, as we're wrapping up, I wonder if you'd answer this question. If this was your last interview, what would you want the world to know?
That's quite a question. I would want the world to know, Marguerite, that I did my best effort to create a message to help inspire people to lean into this ultimate gift of love for those that we care about most. We all want what is best for those that we love. And I truly do think that a well-organized estate plan, a legacy plan, is really one of the ultimate gifts of love that we can leave behind for those that we care about most.
I agree 100%. You know, my stepmom was very, very special to me. We had a really close relationship. We were business partners for 14 years before she passed away. And I asked her the same question I just asked you. And her response was, love as much as you can. And I believe that estate planning is not just for me and about my life. It's really about the remembrance that I leave behind. How will I be remembered? And I want that remembrance to be joyful. I don't want my kids to say, oh, you know, mom was really poorly organized, or she wasn't very thoughtful or inconsiderate or any of those things. No, I want them to focus on the love. And I think when we're organized and we do things properly that way and we communicate with our loved ones, we have the best chance of having that love continue. So my perspective is, don't let mortality get in your way. Yeah. I love your book. I really appreciate it. It's very easy to read. It's not very long. It makes a lot of very good points. I felt a little more organized. I felt kind of proud of myself reading your book. And I hope that other people who read it get to have that positive feeling. Is there anything else you would like to share, or anything that you're hoping that people will know about you and your work?
Yes, there's a very compelling quote that Gail Rubin, a death doula from New Mexico, says, quite frequently in her messaging. And here's her quote. And I think it's something that will resonate with a lot of people. I hope it does. But Gail Rubin says that talking about sex will not make anyone pregnant, and talking about death will not make anyone die.
That's perfect.
So it's just a funny way to add some humor to all of this about an issue that we all have to face, but we're just much better to lean into it, and it basically will help us live better and appreciate every day that we do have.
I am filled with such gratitude for every opportunity I have to connect with other people. And, one thing we didn't talk about today was charitable intent. And I know you make a point of it in your book. Would you share with us a little bit about how charities benefit, or how our communities might benefit in our planning?
Yes. In our country, Canada, and I'm sure in your country as well, Marguerite, the rules are set up in such a way that if people care to include charitable donations within their estate planning, there are significant tax incentives to do that. And that's why the charitable sector around the world relies on these types of donations and financial support to a large degree. And charities have so much of an impact, a positive impact in our world. And that's why I wanted to include it, because it is a significant component of estate planning, as you well know. From the financial planner's perspective, when I was working in that field, there was a bit of a joke that we would often hear at seminars and so on, and I'm sure you've probably heard this too, is that when we die, we can leave our money to basically one of three or three different sources. We can leave our money to family, charity, or government. Pick any two you want. And no one wants to leave money to government typically, but charities are an important aspect of estate planning, and for good reason.
And I want to put it out there that you might have charitable intent. You may have received help from someone at some point in your life, and it's right to give back a bit. But I think giving back after you die is the perfect time to do it. We don't know exactly how much we're going to need during our lifetime. Care costs continue to rise. Grocery costs continue to rise. There's an uncertainty in the world. And your children, your family, people that have physically and personally assisted you might come first in your planning. That's perfect. But I like the idea of having charity as a residual beneficiary, of being your backup. If no one else survives you, and this moment has come in time, there's no need to go to court. There's no need to fix anything. If you've named a couple of charities after your family, and charities will still receive funds over time this way. Not every plan comes out exactly the way we were hoping. That's why we plan for this, right? We have a lot of what ifs in our estate plans. And I really appreciate all of your work, Greg. It's resulted in a lovely book that's very helpful for a lot of people, and I hope many, many, many more people read it.
Yes. Well, thank you, Marguerite. And if I could just give one more little plug for the book.
Please.
The full title is Do Not Ignore Your Mortality, Practical Advice from a Funeral and Financial Insider. It's available on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, Apple, iTunes. It's also available in audiobook format. And one of the easiest ways that people can find it, aside from Amazon, is through my website, donotignoreyourmortality.com, where I also have a list of a curated list of questions that can help people get these conversations going in a more meaningful way. And that's available on my website. It's called the Probing Legacy Questions. That's available to anyone free of charge.
Great. Well, thank you again so much for taking the time to be with me today and to help more people plan for this.
Money management and legacy. Will you be ready for life?